I'm glad to share the next session, and we are starting with a presentation by Kilim Nam, Soojin Lee, Hae-Yun Jung, based in South Korea, where the last GWLN was held, and they were really wonderful hosts last year in Seoul. The title of their presentation is From Neologism Extraction to Dictionary Description, Methodological Issues in Corpus Balance, Word Unit Bias, and LLM Assistance. You have the floor.
Hi, hello. I hope you are hearing me fine. Is that all right? Yes. Okay. Can you see my screen? I just shared, but I'm not sure if it's fine. Yes. All right. So good morning, everyone. So we are going to present this study titled From Neologism Extraction to Dictionary Description, Methodological Issues in Corpus Balance, Word Unit Bias, and LLM Assistance. And this study was conducted by Professor Kilim Nam from Yonsei University and Soojin Lee and myself from Kyungbook National University. Right. So just for the context, since the release of ChatGPT to the public a year and a half ago, it has become inevitable to take AI and large language models into account in most, if not all, fields of linguistics, including lexicography and neology research. And our study aims to reassess the current methodology for extracting Korean neologisms, and that includes reviewing the bias of the sources used to extract those neologisms, but also reevaluating the target of the extraction, which is for now focused on formal neologisms, and thereby dismissing semantic neologisms. In addition to this, we also investigate how LLMs can be used to identify neologisms and compile dictionary-like definitions for those neologisms. So these are the contents of the presentations. First, I will give a brief overview of the Korean neologism investigation methodology. Then I'll explain the current status of neologism research in Korea and discuss related issues. Finally, I will present a number of experiments about identifying Korean neologisms and writing the lexicographic definitions using both Korean and foreign LLMs. So let's start with our research background and methodology. So this is basically the overview of a Korean neologism investigation project that was conducted from 1994 to 2019 by the government organism, the National Institute of Korean Language. And this project can be divided into 5 phases based on methodological changes, most notably the use of a corpus from 2005 and the use of a web-based extractor from 2012 to 2019. 2019 is when the government discontinued the project. However, the team in Kyungbook National University continued to carry out the investigation of neologisms independently, using more or less the same criteria with some adjustments based on the tools and resources that we have available, using a corpus to find neologisms, which is then augmented by manual identification. So the corpora used in this project. Oh, sorry. I think the slides are not going. Are you seeing the slides methodology going through? Because it seems that it's frozen.
Yes, we are still with your introduction slide, but you are controlling the slides from your end.
Yes, but for me, from my end, it is going fine. Should I try again?
It's moving now. Thank you.
Oh, it's moving now. It's fine? Oh, okay. All right. Sorry about this. So yes, I was explaining that the corpora that are used for this project are characterized by a focus on daily newspapers, and that constitutes a first methodological issue, which can be subdivided into 2 points. First, the bias towards the written register of a news genre cannot attest to the first appearance or spread of neologisms in actual language use. The second bias of a news genre regards its limitation in terms of topics. That is, we are more likely to collect neologism in domains that are specific to the news genre. And finally, the method of extractions is based on word forms, which means that only formal neologisms can be extracted and semantic neologisms are mostly overlooked. So this study focuses on the 2021 neologisms collected within the scheme of a Korean neologism investigation project. And to be able to discuss the appropriateness of these linguistic resources and methodologies, we examined the first appearance and use patterns in the news articles, the IM instant messaging chats, and the online post subcorpora of the so-called module corpus compiled by the National Institute of Korean Language, and which we divided into 3 time periods as shown on the table on the slide. So this division into 3 periods was made to match the time span during which the neologisms are collected in the Korean Neologism Investigation Project, that is from 1st July of a given year to 30 June of the following year. So let's look into the results of this examination and the issues that it reveals about the Korean neologism research. So here we'll just show 2 selected examples. The first is the case of patbung, which is an abbreviation of patbungo pang, a type of Korean pastry. This neologism was collected by the project in 2022. However, it already appears in the period 1 of the IM chat subcorpus. And if we look at the Naver news outlinks, it also appeared in 2020. And if we expand the online investigation to also include blogs, for example, we find that it was even used as early as 2012. And this tendency was found in other neologisms, which clearly shows the shortcomings of using news texts, news articles only as sources for extracting neologisms. The second case, which is a bit more elaborated, is a case of the highly productive Korean suffix "serop," which is usually combined with nouns, including common nouns and proper nouns, with native Korean words and loanwords. And this suffix means having the quality or the characteristics of the noun to which it is affixed. So we found that unregistered words formed with this suffix were most frequent in the online post than in IM chats, and finally, they were least frequent in the news articles. Furthermore, as you can see on this table, there is also a discrepancy in the range of domains within which serop derivatives are created and used. Only 20 neologisms were common to all 3 genres. And if we examine in more detail, we can observe also a discrepancy in the type of nouns the suffix combines with. So for example, if you just look at the first row for the proper nouns, in the news article, the suffix tended to be combined with names of politicians, celebrities, or big companies, while in the more colloquial corpora of the IM chats and online posts, the proper nouns were more varied and also more general. So regarding the bias of the word form, initially the Korean Neologism Investigation Project was also identifying manually semantic neologisms, which were marked in the report with this clover sign. But from phase 4, in 2012. That is after we started to use the automatic web extractor. No more separate manual collection of semantic neologisms has been carried out. There have been attempts in large-scale corpus research to automatically identify changes in meaning, but most of the time the conclusion is that it remains a challenging task, and hopefully LLMs will be developed enough to fill in this gap. Let's move on to the final part of this presentation, that is the review of LLMs for the compilation of Korean neologisms. There has been already a number of experimental studies on how LLMs can contribute to the automation of dictionary compilation and increase lexicographic productivity. In our study, we focus on the potential application of LLMs, not only in detecting and describing unregistered words, but also in identifying semantic neologisms to try to overcome the methodological issues mentioned earlier. So to conduct our 6 experiments, including 2 control tests, we use 3 LLMs, OpenAI's ChatGPT, Google Gemini, and the Korean neighbor globalex. So our first test was about detecting neologisms and unregistered words. The prompt we gave all 3 LLMs was make a list of 35 derivatives with a suffix setup. Only include words that meet the following conditions. That is, the neologisms should not already be included in the Korean dictionary, and the neologisms should not be AI invented. That is, there must be words that people actually use. So these are the results for ChatGPT. Among the 35 recommended derivatives, 1 was a duplicate, which means that there were, in fact, 34 recommendations. Out of these, 8 were already included in the dictionary Udimalsem, which leaves us with 26 potential neologism candidates. 13 of those were actually found across the module corpus, which means that they were actually used by people, but a few of them had quite low frequencies when searched on Google or other browsers, which could mean that they might be only nonce words. As for Gemini, well, first of all, it returned only 20 results, including 2 duplicates, so 18 results, really. And many of the results were not lexical items, but phrases, and even sentences that comprised a word affixed with setup, or even worse, like we had like results with phrases or sentences to which the suffix setup was just added at the end, even if it was not grammatically viable. The 8 agrammatical suggestions were cases where the suffix setup was affixed to forms which it cannot be combined with, such as the participle form of a verbal adjective, for example, or a verb ending. In the end, only 10 suggestions were valid for consideration. But still, among those 10 suggestions, there were some nonce words or even forms made up by Gemini, and some forms were already registered in the dictionary Udimalsem. So now the Korean LLM globalex. So first of all, the results included also tap derivatives and loop derivatives. Meaning-wise, these suffixes are synonymous to setup. But in terms of performance and accuracy of the LLM, we are falling by the wayside. In addition to this, some suggestions were actually word forms of a lexem that was already suggested in the list. Then there were also 10 duplicates. And once the list was cleared of all these noises, we ended up with 3 valid suggestions, of 2 of which are most likely nonce words. The second test was about identifying semantic neologisms. Basically, we asked the LLMs to identify the new meanings for 10 head words of Udimalsem that we know have undergone a semantic shift. And only ChatGPT suggested 1 metaphorical sense for 1 headward, but overall, the results were clearly not satisfying, which means that these assisting tools still need a little assistance from us as well. So we provided them with a more specific explanation and contextual information for a given semantic neologism, that is the word koguma, which literally means sweet potato, but which is also used metaphorically in spoken language and a specific context. So the prompt included 12 usage examples collected from newspapers and blogs, and also mentioned that koguma was used there with two different meanings. And we asked the LLMs to identify these two senses. Well, I'm not going to read all the sentence here, but if you were to read these examples, just by looking at the context and the collocations, which I highlighted here in bold and italics, you wouldn't need to be, to know Korean or to be an LLM for that matter to identify the two senses. I highlighted here the metaphorical senses uses in red. So overall, the three LLMs correctly distinguished the two meanings of koguma, that is koguma as the sweet potato proper and as the metaphor to express a frustrating situation. But regarding the grouping of the examples by meaning, globalex did not manage to classify the sentences properly. The next step was to ask the LLMs to write a dictionary-like definition for koguma, providing a definition and use examples. So as you can see here, ChatGPT provided the part of speech, the literal sense, the metaphorical sense. It divided the examples according to each meaning. Gemini tried to show off a little bit, so to speak, by providing not only the two meanings and corresponding examples, but also supplementing the definition with extra explanations under the label characteristics. And quite interestingly, Gemini did not reuse the sentence examples provided in the previous prompts. It made up like new sentences entirely, while ChatGPT and globalex reused the examples of the previous prompt. In addition, it did not provide the part of speech and instead presented related expressions such as common collocations, as well as encyclopedia-like information. globalex did present the part of speech, but as you can see here, it failed to include the metaphorical meaning in this definition that it has suggested. This shows how limited globalex is, since the new metaphorical meaning has already been added to the dictionary Udimelsem, as you can see on this slide. Now, as a controlled test, we did the experiment, but with a semantic neologism that has not been recorded in Udimelsem yet. The object of this controlled test was the verbal adjective mashita, which means like tasty, yummy, delicious. And here I highlighted in bold and blue color the relevant context for you to see the different meanings of mashita. When it collocates with food-related words, it clearly is the literal meaning, and when it collocates with words denoting emotions, feelings, or even like appearance, you understand that this is the metaphorical sense. So how did the LLMs perform on this query? Once again, ChatGPT's performance was better than the other two. It distinguished and presented separately the literal sense and the metaphorical sense. Gemini presented both literal and metaphorical senses in one single definition, once again adding a lot of unrequired information. And globalex divided the meanings into 4 categories, but the third and fourth categories meanings were actually not very much distinct from the second one. And the metaphorical use of mashita was categorized as slang, which is actually not. Our last experiment is also a controlled test where ChatGPT, as the most accurate LLM among the 3 tested, was asked to identify 4 different types of neologisms and write the dictionary definitions. So these 4 neologisms are the high-frequency semantic neologism 폭풍, which literally means storm. The low-frequency semantic neologism 영접, which literally means welcoming or greeting. The news genre-biased neologism Juel, which is the abbreviation of this expression here that means like a measure for retrieving excess profit from reconstruction projects. And finally, the non-news genre-biased neologism Tolteng, which refers to a tense character situation in video games. So the results show that ChatGPT performed more accurately for the neologisms that were either high frequency or found in news genre than it did for the low frequency neologism 영접 and the video game neologism Tolteng. Of course, this is just a preview, and we would need to repeat these experiments to have a better and more accurate picture of ChatGPT's performance. So overall, if we want to conclude, we can assert that LLMs do show potential for the identification of neologisms, including semantic neologisms, and for the lexicographic compilation of the definitions. Nonetheless, not all LLMs are equal in terms of performance. As of now, ChatGPT has shown the best prospects, but it is still not entirely satisfactory. And GWLN-6 probably performed the worst. Quite interestingly, neither GWLN-6 was claimed to have learned 6,500 times more Korean data compared to foreign LLMs, and yet performed the least satisfactorily. This shows that LLMs still need to be expanded and developed, but quantitative methods do not make everything. The understanding of linguistic resources also matter. And of course, for now, there's still a great need for human intuition. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Hae-Yun, for keeping the time and especially for this stimulating talk. I'm quite sure that there are questions either from Pretoria or online.
Since there are no questions here in Pretoria and we still have a few minutes, may I comment that LLMs so far I would see more as information tools. So they could be expected to perform much better on finding potential neologisms. And you find that there's still a lot of potential on that. In order to move to compiling entries for these new neologisms, that would be a great advance for LLMs because it would make them go more into being knowledge tools, it seems to me. So Hae-Yun and Soojin, could you detect some difference between the performance? Could you elaborate on the difference that you have detected between the selection and the compilation by the LLMs on the neologisms?
Yes, I know I rushed a little bit. I was a little bit worried about the time. So basically, the main differences is that Gemini and GWLN-6 had a lot of noise. They provided words that were not what we asked, that were not like fulfilling the conditions. And for the compilation of the definition itself, it seemed that ChatGPT was still more able than the other ones to provide a more academic, answer why the other two were not able to actually understand what a dictionary definition is actually like. Yeah, I don't know if I answer your question.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. We have also a question from the chat, so maybe I can read it out loud from Chris Hae-Yun. How would you integrate the use of LLMs into your corpus workflow? For example, for semantic neology, would you ask them to regularly check for semantic changes for all your words in dictionary?
얼만큼 이거 연습을 그거 하냐 물어보는 건데 시간이 될까요? 얼마나 연습? 그러니까 얼마나 그 트레이닝을 하는지. Well, I mean, for now, these were just, like at the stage of, like experiments. That is a great question, like how much we should actually incorporate and like train these LLMs. I guess this will mostly depend on the workforce here and the time that we dispose, I believe. I don't know if I entirely answered the question. It's not something that we have like thought through yet about, like how much we should be doing these experiments. We are still at the stage of trying out these tests.
Can I add something?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. As for the study of semantic neologisms, as we tested, while the LLMs is good at the semantic expansion description, they seem unable to identify expressions that is undergoing semantic expansion currently. So, especially in the case of low frequency neologisms, we frequently have tested the LLMs from abroad or from domestics. It is extremely difficult to identify semantic neologisms technically. So even extracting the candidate group is challenging, we think. Well, I'm not sure, but if it is enough for your question, but we can add some information that we have tested.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm asking the organizers if we can move on maybe to the next presentation, if there are no more questions. So thank you again for this innovative and experimental talk. And so I can call to the floor the next speaker, Petra Henrichsen from the Danish Language Council. I guess he is on site because I don't see him online. The title of his presentation is Neology and Nomenclature, Concept Clarification as a Precursor to Computational Lexicography. Petra, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And hello to you in the room, and hello also to all of you behind your screens. It's very lovely to be here in Pretoria. I pity you who are not. So I'm Peter from the Danish Language Council, and this ugly little building at the bottom of your screen, can you see it?
Sorry,
it's actually the Danish Language Council.
Maybe
and the very
you could
ugliness
share, okay.
of this building is actually going to play a role in this talk. Let me see, I have some control here. Maybe I will need another format in my slides because then otherwise we cannot see what's going to come at the bottom, but that's okay. So the Language Council, we are responsible for developing and maintaining maintaining the Danish orthography. Sorrow. No. Right. So, is this better? I never get used to this situation. Okay. So we're responsible for the development and the maintenance, of course, of the Danish orthography. And this used to be a fairly manually. Can you hear me? I have to
yes,
turn it.
Yes, but we cannot see the screen.
Like
Sorry to interrupt you.
So it used to be a fairly maintaining the Danish orthography. It used to be a fairly manual process since the council was founded back in 1955, but of course it cannot be anymore. So we have had to develop IT-based tools to assist our senior lexicographers in picking new words for the orthographic norm. And in this process, we have been forced to rethink many of the definitions, the very definitions surrounding neology. And perhaps this has had some implications for our way of thinking of our style of lexicography. There are some pros and cons. We have been forced to go formal in order to be able to communicate with our software engineers. And this going forward has, it forced us to sharpen many of our concepts. And there are some pros and cons, and perhaps this is exactly what I'm going to present to you and discuss with you, I hope. The pros and cons of going formal in neology. So in this talk, I'm going to do this, we have 4 stations here. First, I'm going to present the Danish Language Council, DSN. Then I will turn to the need for tightened terms and concepts once you enter into software development projects. Then I'll present the tool that we're working on presently, the NeoClink, and finally some conclusions and hopefully openings also. So, the Danish Language Council, this is how we perceive ourselves as masters of the Danish orthography. If you saw us, we might possibly look a little bit more like this. So our main product is the Retskrivningsordbogen, or as I shall call it, RO. This is the fundamental orthographic dictionary of Danish, actually defining the Danish orthography. It has 2 parts. Well, considered as a book, it has 2 parts. It has a traditional dictionary with 64,000 something lemmas, with information about inflection and compounding, so on. Also, it has a part with rules describing or explaining the interpunction, like where to put your commas, full stops, how to make abbreviations, all that stuff. Of course, we have to maintain and develop this, so we have to allow the dictionary parts to grow because simply the language develops. But we cannot allow it to grow very fastly, so only by a few hundred lemmas per year, as opposed to the ocean of new words being coined in the media and around the dinner tables and so on. So traditionally, we have used a sort of soft core definition of neologisms, or neologisms, to be able to pick in a meaningful way those words that can say to be now part of the shared vocabulary. We have a theory from 1995 by Pia Jarvat that has been used, but it's rather soft, as mentioned. Very example-based categories in place, very experience-based, you could say, in place of formal. And once you are communicating with the language engineers, this is really no good. You cannot really explain these categories. You can only show them by examples. And engineers don't like that. So we need, as we needed IT support, we needed sharpened concepts. Obviously, we need a definition of neologism itself. That's the core category of the whole enterprise. But as a stepping stone, we found it useful to define another middle concept called the exologism. And at this point, I should thank one of the reviewers, one of the anonymous reviewers. We used to call it a xenologism because it has to do with words foreign to a dictionary. But we got, the reviewers suggested the word exologism, which is far better. Exologism, in turn, is defined in terms of lexical support, lexical redundancy, and I'm going into some detail now. So what is an exologism? Well, intuitively speaking, it's a word that is foreign to a dictionary. It's not covered there, and it's, in a sense, it's not recognized by the dictionary. This is only intuitively speaking, and I'm going more formal in the next slides. So the simplest definition of an exologism is simply if you have a corpus, then all the word forms, tokens appearing in the corpus, and you have a reference dictionary, all those word forms that do not appear or are in some sense not covered in the dictionary, they are exologisms. On the simple definition, if for some word form in the corpus you don't have a lemma in the dictionary, well, then it's an exologism. So each pair of language resources, C and D, corpus and dictionary, you get a generated list of exologisms, meaning all those word forms not appearing in your dictionary. So while we developed, in the early stages of development of this new Clink program, we used these two resources as reference. The first one is the Danish gigaword corpus, which is a very popular resource consisting of, as the name suggests, a little more than 1 billion tokens in, I think, 25 different genres, so a mixed genre corpus. And of course, the D would be Retskrivningsordbogen, the orthographic dictionary. As you will see very well, with this slightly primitive definition of exologism, you get some some anomalies, and I'll give you a few examples. So in the corpus we find spejepølse, which is a smoked sausage, but spelled with a J. It's supposed to be spelled with a G. So it's in the corpus, it's not in the dictionary. But intuitively, it doesn't mean that it's foreign to the dictionary. It's just missing by mistake. Another example is of the same kind is strukket, which is an irregular inflection of the verb strække, meaning a stretch. The proper or the regular inflection is strakt. Strukket is simply generated by a lot of language users in analogy with another verb which is much more frequent, trække, meaning pulling or pull, I guess, draw, which has the participle form trukket. So by analogy, people say strukket in place of strakt. Again, this is, you could call it, it's absent by mistake, not for principled reasons. 42 Pretoria are more examples from in the Danish orthographic dictionary. Obviously we don't cover all numerals, which is quite impossible. Also, we don't cover proper names. There are simply too many in the world. That doesn't mean that they're foreign in any interesting way from the dictionary. Now for two more interesting examples. You could call them borderline examples. Kiwi tart, is that foreign? It means a tart, a kiwi tart. We have other tarts in the dictionary, like apple tart and banana tart. We cannot take all tarts, but that, again, it's more for reasons of parsimony that it's left out. As opposed to øjebæ, which is a quite different sort of compound. Øje means the eye, and bæ is like poo, what you expect to find in a diaper. Øjebæ is an informal term meaning a very ugly building. So there you have it again, a kiwi tart and an øjebæ. So we want the definition now, we want to sharpen it in order to distinguish between the Kivitat and the OEB. One is clearly an exologism, we want it to be, the other one is not really. So now we work on the definition. An exologism is like before, it's a function of two arguments, a C and a D. But now you see it's an exologism is represented in a corpus, but it's not supported in a dictionary D. What does supported mean? Well, supported is if W is present in, it should be D. If W is present in D, then obviously it's supported in D. It's still also supported if it's absent only due to unintended mistake, that was the Spypulser case, or deliberate domain restriction like numerals, names, and professional lingo, or other things. That doesn't make it an interesting exologism. And also lexical redundancy, that's the difficult one. So when is W redundant in D? Well, in this instance, in order to explain Kiviterde, well, if D is a compound WA, WB, such that both WA and B are in D already, A belongs to a certain semantic domain, SA, in this case, the domain of edibles. B belongs to a domain SB, in this case, bakery, and the compound D has, in D, there are several compounds of the pattern W alpha, W beta, where W alpha belongs to SA and W beta to SB. This is all a little technical, but if we could see the bottom of my slide, yes, thank you very much. You can see in the dictionary, we already have honey cake, cheese biscuit, rye bread, so on. So by analogy, we also, in a sense, we have Kivitat. I hope this makes sense. Now, okay, let me see. Maybe I've scrambled my slides. Neologism. Fully restrained, sorry. Okay, no. Yes, I skipped some slides. It's not important. So now we have a fairly firm definition of exologism. And we can now go on to the definition of neologism, which is the interesting part, of course. Now, we can claim that a neologism is an exologism in this final sense, in the pair of resources C double prime, D double prime, such that C double prime faithfully represents the contemporary language production. That's not an easy one, but I'll come back to this. And D faithfully represents the shared vocabulary at a time T, which is prior to present day, of course. So that could be delta T could be 10 years, 20 years, something like that. And now we're approaching the DSN sniffer, of course. So Neoclink is built on the definitions that I've now sketched for you. So what Neoclink does, it investigates the media stream we get through DSN every day, and decides for each language token, each token in the corpus, is this token a neologism or not? In order to answer this question meaningfully, well, Neoclink has to go through 5 stages. First of all, establish a corpus C double prime, representing, as I mentioned, the current language production, quantify N in C, then define delta T, what do we compare with, compile a dictionary D double prime, and prove that N is unsupported in D double prime. I hope this makes sense. There's a lot of technicality behind it, but if you're interested, we can communicate afterwards. So that these 5 principal steps have to be taken, but also the division of labor is now pretty clearly defined. So this is the amount of text and language production DSN is faced with, more than 800 million tokens per year from our main source Infomedia. That's basically the newspapers and magazines and news groups and so on. And we have several other sources. So these comprise the corpus C double prime in practice. Next step, a neologism is in this pair C double prime, D double prime is, well, the thing is here that C double prime is a corpus with a lot of complementary sections, because we deciding that something is a neologism, it doesn't hinge on the frequency alone, but also the distribution among various sources. So our C double prime has complementary sections, and we have to prove that W is substantially represented not only in C double bar overall, but also in each of the sectors, C double prime 1 through N. Then we have to define a proper time frame. We are using 2012, where we had the 4th edition of the Retskrivningsordbogen, the orthographic dictionary, out. Then we have to define the dictionary, as mentioned, at D double prime. Obviously, it contains Retskrivningsordbogen, but also, as Ilan mentioned, the DDO, the Danish dictionary, and also the old traditional dictionary were published in 1955, containing, I think, 250,000 lemmas or so, just to ensure that old words will not appear suddenly as neologisms in disguise. So. And the 5th stage is, well, we have to prove that N is a neologism in C prime, D prime, as explained before. Just a few examples here. Spejepølse spelled correctly, you can see in the leftmost column, has an exact match, and correspondingly is certainly not a neologism. Spejepølse spelled with a J is not either, as explained before, because it's actually part of D double prime as a flawed match. Same for strukket. 42 is not there. It's what we could call an implied match, as explained, and Pretoria as well. And kiviterte is not a neologism either, since we can now consider it a redundant match. Øyebæ has a no everywhere else, and suddenly it's not recognized in D double prime, and it's a candidate. At least it's suggested by Neoclink as a candidate neologism. Now, interesting, what happens when we compare the output of Neoclink to what our senior lexicographers suggest? This is a little part of Nyordslisten, which is the manually produced list of new words. This is going on, this process of picking candidates for neologism for inclusion in our dictionary. And as you can see, interestingly, many of the words that our senior lexicographers pick, they're actually very old. Some of them have suddenly become in fashion. They've been around for a long time. Now they belong to the shared vocabulary. But some of them could be said to be simply forgotten. They should have been adopted for many years, but now they are discovered by the humans. Interestingly, our program actually found them. So in comparison to this manual procedure, Neoclink has a quite different performance pattern. In terms of recall and precision, we see a very high recall, meaning that almost all the neologisms picked by the senior lexicographers are also present in the output from Neoclink. The recall factor is even beyond 0.9 usually. The other way around, well, not so impressive, because Neoclink is far too active in picking, suggesting neologisms. There we find a precision of only 0.1 to 0.3, meaning that NeoClink produces an enormous amount of possible neologisms that the lexicographers are not prepared to accept. So yeah, I'll jump over here because there's interesting error analysis. What kind of exologisms and redundancies are picked by NeoClink? But the take-home message is you cannot use NeoClink as, you can use it as a source of supply, but you cannot allow it any sort of decision authority. It cannot be, well, some in the Language Council had a dream of simply having a NeoClink pick the neologisms and then, well, have the lexicographers do something else. This is not at all acceptable, perhaps not this, so surprising. So I think I might be running out of time, so I think you should just see here. This is, well, it's the data template used by the NeoClink program. It's using the Clink template, which is actually described in the paper in my abstracts, and there are also some references, or you could contact me if this is interesting for you. So this Titan terminology, we had to do it in order to be able to communicate with our software engineers, but there are perhaps some interesting corollaries. One nice effect of this is that we were forced to, it became possible for us to actually classify neologisms, not in those soft old, I think we had 5 categories and everyone was quarreling where to actually put a neologism, but we now have a far more rational classification of neologisms based on the Clink template. This is just a suggestive example. You can see Øyebæ. Now it's classified as a compound consisting of a sensory organ in Danish combined with a derogative in Danish, and so on. Corollary 2, we have a far more, and that's perhaps the most important take-home message, we have a far more clear-cut division of labor inside the Language Council, but also among the cooperating partners. I mentioned these 5 tasks, and they can pretty much be distributed over working groups. Of course, as I mentioned, we also need a responsible RO editor on top of it all. Then the corollary 3 is that it has become easier for us to recycle language resources. We don't have to define a new CW, DW every year. We can simply recycle resources, and we get comparable lists of candidate neologisms. We can simply compare from year to year because they have been derived using the same definitions. Corollary 4, as I mentioned, it has made it much easier for us to communicate not only with our own assistants and across technical linguistic borders within the Language Council, but also with our external partners. So summing up, I already said most of it, I believe. It has helped us classify, divide, recycle, and collaborate. That was, it sounds very positive, all of it, and I believe it is, but there is, of course, a con to the pro also, namely that this doesn't really, we had hoped that we would be sort of converging against a new theory of lexical neology, even contribute to a theory. And, but I can't say this has happened. It's more like a new modus operandi that we have found better ways to work on this, but I can't say really perhaps say that we have that we contributed to new theory. I'm not sure about this. but at least we are not saying that computational neology has suddenly become easy, far from it. But at the very least, you could say that some of our major challenges now have names. This is quite important. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this brilliant talk, which has also very interesting theoretical implications, if I may say. And I think that everybody agrees that the concept of exologism itself is very promising. And we have a question by John Hambley online and a comment. Please, John.
I just want to back up what Giovanni has said. For all of us interested in the glossary of the terms of neology, we've been served up royally this morning. And the exo terminology is also perhaps a whole series that we'll be able to incorporate. Just one minor question. Wouldn't Øyebæ also be an Anglicism too? Isn't it the Danish equivalent of I saw? Is that the sort, but it's perhaps not the sort of information that needs to go into an orthographic dictionary?
Oh, could someone repeat the question? I'm a little hard of hearing.
No. Just to see the example, your prime example of Øyebæ. Isn't that an Anglicism that goes back to I saw? And is that information relevant to the orthographic dictionary?
I saw. Well, do you think they are like, what would be your judgment? I mean, are they related in any deeper sense? I mean, the idea would be the same, but saw and bæ is not very clearly, perhaps I didn't get your question quite.
No.
Of course, we have a lot of neologism coming in from English. Obviously, it's a major part of. As I talked about this new possibility of classifying, and well, maybe I could turn back to my example, because one of the new categories coming up is exactly the relation between English loanwords and Danish material combining. I mean, we don't have to classify anything as an Anglicism or a Danish compound like that. We can simply describe the anatomy of neologisms. But I'm not quite sure I'm answering your question, actually.
Yes, completely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And there is another question from Chris Hae-Yun online. Please, Chris.
So, very interesting. Thank you. I'm from the Dutch Language Institute, and we also compile the official spelling dictionary. So I'm very interested in this. But I did see that some of the classifications that your algorithm, so to speak, they require quite some linguistic insight. Like if you have to establish that dividate is a implied match or drukke is a flawed match, you can only do that if you have linguistic insight. So does NeoKing do that automatically? Do you use any NLP techniques to do so?
Well, this is what we can inherit from the CLINK program, which is actually what I've been working on. The CLINK program refers to the Danish word net for one reason. I mean, that for one thing, it has several databases with a semantic nature, with semantic hierarchies and everything. So the kiwi case, I suppose that you see, the system knows that a kiwi is an edible and knows that a tart is a piece of bakery. So in this case, I gave myself an easy case, because we have very nice hierarchical information for exactly these categories. And this is not at all easy, as you know. But the CLINK program can draw on such semantic databases, but also on word nets and so on. not only word nets, but word embedding and so on. So we are employing machine learning techniques and TensorFlow and stuff like that also. But there's a huge story behind this. I think we should talk sometime about this.
Thank you.
Thank you. One very short last question from YouTube. Benjamin Roxel is asking, how did you get the stream for social media?
Okay, well, I have to answer on the behalf of someone else because I'm not that person in the Language Council. There is a bureau in Denmark collecting together all the streams of media and basically everything that's published gets through this, and we get it in a compiled fashion. So it's called Infomedia. I think they send almost a billion tokens our way every year. So, and we get the analysis. Well, myself being a computational linguist, I'm most interested in the full, in the the plain text version, all of the words. But some of the lexicographers are more interested in compiled versions and so on. So we have very nice access to almost everything that's produced on print in Denmark, and also social media to a large extent. But again, I'm not really the right person to, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, also for the interesting discussion part. So I think we can move on to the last talk of this morning's session.
Thank you.
Okay, if you agree, now I can call to the floor Petra Storjohann from the Leibniz Institut für Deutsche Sprache in Mannheim. And the title of her talk is Neologisms and Their Functions in Critical Discourse. Petra, you have the floor.
Thanks very much. I try sharing my screen. And Giovanni, if you could give me a nod, everything is working fine. Big screen. Thanks a lot. You see the building I'm working in. It is a slightly better version of the Danish Language Council, I believe. If you have listened carefully to the highlight talk, that you might have detected a similar title for one of the task groups in the working group 3. And some of the work actually comes directly from this task group and from cooperation with other task group members or working group members as well. I would like to start by saying I want to refer to critical discourse and neologisms in particular. And what I understand by discourse as such is, for me, discourse and critical discourse in particular is a social practice where meaning, positions, and arguments are constantly being negotiated through communicative acts. I will argue that the investigation of neologisms can reveal, for example, argumentation strategies, ideological stances, aspects of evaluation, sentiment, discrimination, positions, and/or disempowerment. And some of these discourse properties mentioned here can literally be attached to neologisms or are represented by them. This, of course, does not hold true for every single neologism. I must say that as a footnote here. I am deeply rooted in corpus linguistic research, so my approach is usage-based and applied. I adopt this approach because it's quite established in critical discourse analysis, CDA here, when it investigates features of communication or discourse with a particular lexical focus on things. And combining the corpus linguistic approach from a critical discourse analysis point of view, sometimes is referred to corpus-assisted discourse studies, CATS here. And Paul Baker puts it like that: it examines how ideologies and power relations are expressed in language. And I listed you a number of representatives who have used this approach that I will use. And there are plenty, particularly in the English-speaking communities, English studies in England, for example. There are some studies and like Sketching Muslims, a corpus-driven analysis of representations around the word Muslim in the British press by Paul Baker and others, or by Malbec looking at words representing sustainable development, all with a lexical focus. However, there are only a few examples that show neologism using a corpus approach or using a critical discourse approach. For the German term Globalisierung, we have a number of studies, for example, by Teubert, and there are lots of studies referring to Brexit, the term Brexit as well, with respect to English. I would like to start with an English example of greenflation because it might be easier to understand what I'm after here. Using a corpus-driven approach means I have to look at collocates as a systematic access to lexical patterns. And this is only a sketch here that I draw. You find verbs and adjectives modifying greenflation, the concept of greenflation. And these are more on the left-hand side. I arranged them there. And then you have a number of nouns referring to different concepts, for example, to effects or costs or climate change. And when you look at those nouns in particular, you can see that you can arrange them in 3 different contexts, which are highly interrelated, such as economic contexts, for example, where they discuss the phenomena of markets and on rising prices or the availability of products. You have political context, where there are discussions on problems for society because of the rising prices, or rules and regulations or new laws that come into force. And you have environmental contexts referring to campaigns and initiatives dealing with specific actions to improve the climate. I argue here that greenflation is a discursive neologism because it shows properties that are relevant for critical discourse, such as domains and intersections to related discourses, such as the climate discourse or the economic crisis. A lot of concerns and responses are expressed by words such as experiencing and managing. And you have a number of terms that are not neutral, such as risk, worsening, combating. They express evaluations and they are expressions of sentiment, for example. And when you look at some of the contexts closer, like keywords in context and closer contexts, you find a number of positions as expressed by the government, for example, by consumers, by activists, or different businesses. So let's have a look at the German greenflation. The first thing that you see is there aren't any adjectives modifying the term. We actually use greenflation because we borrowed it from the English language. We have a number of verbs on the left-hand side and then a number of nouns, which are quite similar to the English term, but there are slight differences as well. For example, you also see the economic context, the political context, and environmental context, but we also have a number of collocates that refer to the war in the Ukraine and an energy crisis that Germany feared due to the stop of gas imports from Russia, for example. So it's slightly different because greenflation is kind of embedded in the discourse of the climate crisis and economic crisis, and they're closely related to energy crisis and also have to do with the war in Ukraine, for example. And when you look at these collocates more closely, the ones in orange now are the ones that are neologisms. And this is a slight indicator here already what I'm after. They take specific positions. You don't see any adjectives here, for example. You don't see any verbs. They don't need to be established. But you have a lot of new terms in specific areas of contexts. So there's a close relationship, I believe, between neology, critical discourse, and lexicography. But where am I heading to? If you look up greenflation, the English term, for example, in Wiktionary, it says it's a rise in energy prices as a result of shifting from fossil fuels to sustainable energy sources. And I believe this simply won't do if you want a detailed analysis and if you want to capture all perspectives and nuances that there are. With respect to German lexicography, we do have quite a tradition of discourse lexicography, a term that you come across when you look at some of the dictionaries developed by Heidrun Kemper. These are print dictionaries or online dictionaries, and they always have historical keywords that are particularly controversial, written down in dictionaries and explaining different stances and positions here. However, none of these are corpus-based, so they don't follow the corpus linguistic strand. And Kemper highlights, for example, the relevance of vocabulary and topical, speaker-related, textual, temporal, and functional aspects. This is what you have to imply in discourse lexicography. So 2 years ago, I got the task to develop a new neologism dictionary for German for all the terms that emerged after 2020. And I thought, when I looked at the neologism, and you have them written down here, the discourses that we have since that time, it's the climate crisis, it's COVID-19, it's a supply chain crisis, it's an energy crisis, it's a migration crisis, it's the war in the Ukraine, and we also had the election campaign. But these are crisis-related discourses, which means that a lot of neologisms are crisis-related neologisms. And I thought, why not combining some of the aspects I have from the tradition of discourse lexicography, combine it with corpus linguistics and approaches as offered by critical discourse analysis, and apply it to the German neologism lexicography for the first time. At the moment, we are developing a new resource. It's called IDS, like my institution, Neo 2020 Plus, because it's for terms emerging after 2020, new words in use. It's a combination of a dictionary, which contains single headword related items, and a dashboard that goes closely together, where you have different kinds of information, and I will show you both briefly. What I show you in what follows, it's not the real dictionary because we are about to launch it this year. So bear in mind that once you come across it online, it might look slightly different in terms of fonts or colors or things like that. So this is a fake entry, but it gives you a good impression of what we'll do. We'll have the paraphrase at the beginning. We have synonyms and grammatical information at the beginning, because that's the type of information most users want instantly when they open an entry, as we found in user studies. There are different sections dealing with different details, such as origin and development, represented by the tiles, by the graphical tiles here, background information and examples and patterns. While the left and the right type of tiles represent more linguistic information, it's the background information in the middle that refers to a number of extra-linguistic information, or combines a lot of linguistic and extra-linguistic information. What we do in this section is we provide details on the thematic embedding, for example. Greenflation often occurs in the context of politics, economics, environment, and energy here. We also explicitly say that it's part of the climate crisis and the energy crisis, and there are words which are used in similar contexts, and these are fossilflation, or climateflation. Next to that, we give some information on how greenflation is represented in different text types, such as mass media or social media or online communication. And sometimes there's a difference in the focus of what's being reported in these text types, and we kind of spell this out here. And then we have the historic connection. You see an interactive timescale here, because a lot of terms are closely connected to specific historic events, and we explain the event that happened and what it has to do with the term that it denotes or where it comes from, and the interactive timescale. So if you would scroll down after that, this is actually the part where we spell out information on public discussions or controversies. And if you have two boxes, as you have here, you can imagine that there are opponents and supporters. And we tell people here that, for example, the opponents talk about the pricing and that it has social effects and social repercussions. Some people can't afford energy anymore. The supporters, however, argue that it does have to, greenflation is something that happens, but we have to change our energy productions to make it more sustainable, to fight the climate change, and it is part of our political agenda. And in order to attest what we state here, we always provide corpus examples for both positions. So this is the place where we can find, where we can, in a narrative style, where we can explain anything we find in a corpus, because it provides us without any limits, really. We don't use style notes or usage notes because they have their limits, and we can just explain what we can observe in different texts here. The dashboard is slightly different. It provides information not related to a single head word, but rather about the project, about the dictionary, about neologism in general. And this is just an illustration of what it might look like. It's a masonry style dashboard, and I'm sure you've come across that with respect to other fields or subjects. You'll find different kinds of graphs or papers that have been published in the project, reports, podcasts, videos, and there's a section on the right-hand side on discourses, for example, current discourses, Ukraine war, energy crisis, and climate crisis. And just imagine you would click on that tile. It might look something like this. You have all the discourses listed on top and all the neologisms that are part of the discourse. So you have the bundles of new terms that emerged. Because we are approached quite regularly, for example, by journalists who say, what are all the new words that have entered the language and which refer to the war in the Ukraine, for example? And this is one way of offering the information. And for the most dominant terms representing those discourses, for example, Energiekrise, Ukraine-Krieg, Klimakrise, you might find a frequency graph underneath. Now, what do you receive? What do you get if you click on the energy crisis button for further information? Because it should be interactive. Here, for example, they are all listed, and over a menu, you can determine, do you want them listed alphabetically? Do you want them listed chronologically according to frequency, or as bundles of subdomains, or shown in a network, for example? Again, this is a suggestion here for alphabetical order, together with frequency graphs of the most dominant terms, such as energy transition, gas price cap, or energy price cap. If you change that according to chronology, this is what I have in mind. For example, you have a time scale here, and you can list the new terms when they entered, together with an attestation from a corpus, probably the first attestation that you come across, showing contextual information here. Okay. All these are only suggestions so far, because right now at the moment we are developing what the dashboard should offer and how the information is presented to the user. There's lots more to do. For example, I believe that usage-based studies on discourse-related neologisms need to combine complementary corpus methods for different perspectives on discourse features. And more importantly, we need to learn how to do that. Looking at keywords or looking at collocates is a well-established method in semantics and discourse studies and lexicography. There's not more to say to that. This always looks at the syntagmatic level of words, and it's very helpful. We also here receive annually lists of new terms that have entered the language, but what you never get is in what kind of relationships are these terms to each other and to other terms. So I suggest, as a complementary approach for the future, also to use word embedding tools, as this one here, for example, in order to show the semantic relation between some of the terms, the paradigmatic level, to complement the syntagmatic level of the collocation analysis. When you have a closer look here, for example, energy crisis in the middle, it's a visualization of semantic closeness. So the closer the terms are to the keyword, to the search term, the closer they are semantically. So the big benefit is you can detect synonyms or antonyms, for example. You can also identify different relationships to other terms. You find more indications for connotation and sentiment in here. You can determine the domain some of the words are in. And you can also detect semantic shifts. Just imagine you would repeat this analysis over the years. You might see changes in the position of the terms, which can be indicators for semantic change, new senses, or new terms coming in general. So you see that using different approaches might be very useful, but it's getting very complex. When you apply the word embedding, the three-dimensional vector space tool, you have energy crisis here on top with all its surrounding very close, semantically close terms. So this is the paradigmatic level here. It's getting much more complex than this, because if you look at how energy crisis, the discourse is being represented, we learn a lot about effects in the corpus, political aims, what it's related to, time references, characterizations, who's affected, or specific political measures to fight the costs. And I got these abstract bubbles here, which are only some of them, which are actually, there should be much more than that. But the color kits that you receive when you analyze energy crisis, for example, you can attribute or allocate to these bubbles, and you see how everything is being exemplified. So you have the paradigmatic level on top, you've got the syntagmatic level below. Again, if you look closely, wherever there's something in orange, these are neologisms. So again, there aren't any adjectives that are new. There are no new terms that tell us who is affected. But a lot of new terms occur in terms of political aims, names for laws, for example, or the methods and approaches that have been used. You see greenflation as effects and impact, for example, and a lot about the specific measures to fight the costs or to save energy. So you see exactly where the new terms come into place. Imagine we would pick out one of them, a more dominant one like effects and impact, and put it in the middle to illustration. Now imagine we have the greenflation here in the middle, and I come back to the very beginning now, add the collocation results of greenflation that I showed at the very beginning, and you kind of guess how complex and dense everything becomes, because I could do that for any new neologism, and I could also do that for any color kit. I could also do that for any term from the word embedding, and then you get a good feeling, and you need to imagine that in a three-dimensional space, how complex a discourse and all its terms are. But you also see where the new terms are, and they do have a specific position. They also function. And this is what I would like to come to. This, by the way, is not a static view. I only can illustrate that in a static way, but really it's very dynamic because it changes continuously. So my title was Neologisms and Discourse Functions, and I try to summarize this because I believe that some neologisms may have discursive and communicative weight at a given time or within a defined time frame. They may carry immediate significance in public conversations and contribute to the depiction of key knowledge structures. They may introduce new ways of thinking sometimes by embodying novel conceptual knowledge. They may act as pivotal nodes within a structured network, as I try to illustrate here with my graphic illustrations. They may also lay the groundwork for further lexical innovation, for example, through word formation processes. They may influence and shape collective thought processes even, and they may play a crucial role in exposing ideological content, cultural values, a range of views and beliefs in societal dialogues or across political spectrums. Just think of all the supporters and opponents, or the politicians, media, scientists, economists, and activists. So very, very complex here. And I think there are many more functions which I'm about to detect and filter out. And maybe at some point I will have a larger list than even this. And I need to close my talk with the question, all these in a dictionary? The new Neologism dictionary is not an explicit discourse dictionary, but I firmly believe that if some of these functions are relevant for meaning and use of the neologisms, then I think we should try to attempt and account for them in a dictionary to provide a better picture for those who are interested. So this would be the end of my talk, and if you care for some references, I also have them here.
Thank you very much, Petra, for this very interesting talk, thought-provoking talk, also from the theoretical and applicative point of view. Are there any questions from Pretoria or online? While we are waiting, I would like to congratulate you on this new project, Neo Plus 2020. Very challenging, but I think very innovative as well, and also with a nice visual. And if I understand well, it's would you define it onomasiological or thematic? Because it's not alphabetical order. I mean, the alphabetical order is not the only entry point, of course.
In the dictionary, you would have the alphabetical order, but looking from an onomasiological point of view, it's nicer to go to the dashboard and search for different information there. So it's a combination of both to a certain degree. And whatever we put in the entry, all the information, since it's all tagged as XML, can easily be extracted and bundled together for the dashboard in a different way. So that's one of the advantages to combine both.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And one more thing, maybe if there are no questions from the audience. Yes, Chris has a suggestion. Maybe would you like to read it out loud for people who are in Pretoria?
Yeah, I can. Can you see me? Yes.
Yes.
I was just because you use a critical discourse analysis to structure the discourse, right? It's a framework to find structures in the discourse. A very related one maybe is framing analysis, like the Goffman type framing analysis that you find in sociology and media studies, where some subject or some crisis in this case, or inflation, is framed as, I don't know, having certain causes causing other things. I don't know whether you're familiar with that type of framing analysis from media studies, but the interesting thing is that there are also approaches to automatic detection of frames in discourses. And that is something you might want to look into as a way to support the dictionary, the Neologism dictionary.
Yeah. Thank you.
I can send you some references.
That would be lovely, yes.
There's even someone working on that in Content, I think, on German, so that might be interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And I think we have a comment from Ilan.
Thank you, Petra, for this very interesting talk. And it's so thought-provoking. I was wondering why you were providing greenflation from Wiktionary, which is not the ideal dictionary, as lexicographers tend to think usually. And then I looked up and I couldn't find it in any English-speaking dictionary, like I looked up in Merriam-Webster or dictionary.com, etc.
Yeah,
and
it's still pretty new, probably. You won't find it in a lot of dictionaries. And since the Wiktionary is so popular and widely used, and I just wanted to take that as a provoking definition as well.
I understood that after I did my little search, and I could find pretty good definitions on like Euronews or non-dictionary like thing. And jumping to the end of your talk, I think it's a kind of proof of the insufficiency of dictionaries today. I mean, there is so much that goes there, you know, and a dictionary is not good enough in order to provide all of that information and knowledge. What do you think?
Yeah. I think we should make the effort of providing that information, particularly because we have different ways of presenting it. For those who do not really care for that information, they do not occur at first sight. So you need to go to different sections in order to be informed about that. So we can work with placing specific information in an entry at specific positions, have the most central, the most essential on top, and then go further down for further information. I believe that most lexicographers wouldn't integrate this kind of information because it's laborious and time-consuming to apply different approaches, even to apply one approach. Undertaking a complex collocation analysis and allocating that to different slots and fillers and abstract concepts, it's time-consuming. And I'm often asked, how long does it take you to work on a dictionary entry like greenflation, for example? Looking at different text types, looking into different corpora, and I would say probably 2 or 3 days. And the question is, how many lexicographers can afford to spend 2 or 3 days working on one entry? So that's, I think, the main reason why it's not being incorporated.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's 1 p.m. sharp, both in Italy and in South Africa. I think there is a lunch break now, if I'm correct. So thank you, everybody, for attending this morning session. I leave the floor to the organizers.